Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Gladius, and we'll get started on our next How to Play video series. Today we're going to talk about the Adeptus Mechanicus. This is also called the Admech, if you're familiar with that. This is the tech priests and the technophiles of the Imperium. So definitely a fun faction. They were originally really strong when they were first released. And then they got nerfed pretty hard where some of their technology got moved to higher tiers, so they're way harder to use than they were when they were first released. So a lot of people have been asking me to do an AdMech video series just to help them because it is much more difficult to play them now. So here you go. You asked and you shall receive. If you're not familiar with these How to Play series that I put together, it's meant to allow you to win on the impossible difficulty setting against the AI in both a quest victory and a conquest victory. The conquest is where you destroy every other faction on the map, and then the quest is you activate the quests on your map settings, and then you just complete through the quest storyline. You get slightly different endings to explain the backstory to your faction. They kind of talk about different aspects depending on which victory you end up going for. But first, if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. So the AdMech here, it says the initial challenge is hard. I think that's generally pretty accurate because the units you'll get access to are very squishy early on. Now they also do a significant amount of damage, so actually early on it kind of reminds me of playing as the Craft World Eldari. I was trying to think of what they were called. I was going to say Eldar, but I should use the terms specific to this game so I don't confuse people if they're newer players. And then later in the game it becomes dramatically easier as you get your elite tier units out, but even then your elite tier infantry are weaker and are very squishy and hard to keep alive. Now you can help that with using your Canticles and different buffs, but definitely a harder faction to use nowadays, and I see why they're frequently killed by the conquest modes, because in the past they would frequently be one of the last survivors because they were so powerful once they get to late game, but they have a very slow start, and so I think the AI really struggles to get them into that late game power surge that they are really known for. So I agree, like I said, about the initial challenge being very hard. I'll try to help you get through that and give you some tips to get you through that really hard spike originally with your campaign. Now they have several special traits. I just call these passive abilities. So you have the Canticles of the Omnisire, and what that is you'll research different canticles, and that will allow you to apply different buffs to your units that can use canticles, and generally that's almost all your infantry or units produced through your infantry producing buildings, or your heroes can also have the canticles. And now they're kind of a mixed blessing, because in some ways they'll give you a positive trait, but then they also have a trade-off where it gives you a negative trait. So you really have to have an idea of what you want to do for your force selection to know which canticles to use, and then the more units you have that can have the canticles applied to them, and I think it maxes out about 10, it can have stronger effects depending on the type of canticles that you're using. And so that's what it's getting at with the doctrine imperatives here, is just telling you that some things will be upgraded and other ones will be decreased or buffed and debuffed. Now your hive cities are unique, and so this is just kind of a fun aspect. Effectively what it does is it'll add one building slot to every location. So if normally you were building on a spot that would only have 2 building spots, well, because of the AdMech you can now have 3 production squares, and the same if you're playing on a place that would normally have 3 production squares, you'll then have 4. And that becomes very important because of their next trait, the monolithic buildings. And so effectively what that does is it'll increase the output, so either resources or production or loyalty, whatever the building is doing, the more you have. So you have 4 ore producing buildings on a tile, then they'll produce more ore resources than if you just had one of different kind of resources on there. And then you also have access to the power surge, which is very similar to the Drukari's ability, where you can select a tile that has certain resources on it. It'll just give you a straight buff to that resource production for several turns, which again is shows you the importance of trying to get the maximum amount out of that monolithic buildings. So not only are you getting a bonus because of having all those buildings together, but then you get an additional bonus when you use your power surge on whatever resource you are most in need of. And they do have a negative trait, unfortunately, called Enslave to the Past. And this really slows down your research, which is kind of a weird situation to be in. You would think with the AdMech you would be most inclined to have the best technology. But what they're saying is, the true innovations have been lost, and now you're just this dim-witted research worshiper or technology worshiper, and you don't really do any of your own research, so they're really bad at it. So it really slows down your research rate. Now, they do have access to reprogramming Castellan robots if you use the Cybernetica data smiths. So if you've been playing this game, you're familiar with what those units look like. They're those little humanoid units that run around with the Castellan packs that do the healing. They can heal vehicles in this game as well, because you can make them, but you can also take over Castilian robots early on. So if you happen to be fortunate enough to have a Castellan robot pack near your base, then certainly you'll want to rush getting the Cybernetica data smiths out, and then you can just start capturing those Castellans and get medium tier units early on, and then just really help you push out and take out a bunch of different resources, get some different locations for other cities being set up, and even potentially fighting an early AI opponent. If you can get 4 or 5 of them going, you can be very, very strong, especially early on if you're right next to another faction. Even the cities can struggle to take down those Castellans, especially if you have your data smiths right outside the range of the buildings and you can sit there and repair them. So it all depends on your situation. I find it's rarely used medium to late game, because by then you're starting to get out stronger units, so then the Castellans are less impressive. But definitely early on, if you can take control of those, that can be huge for you. Now, they also have bionics, so when you're using and creating infantry that have artificial limbs, so they're not purely biological units, they'll get a damage reduction, so that's nice. So it makes your guys a little more durable. And then they also have the adjacency integration. So pretty much what this does is if you have buildings next to each other, so you have 2 different tiles with both having high ore output, then they'll kind of synergize with themselves with each other and help get your resource generation to be higher. So definitely you have to be much more strategic with how you build out your cities with this faction than other ones. So I will load one of my prior save files here and just kind of go through the different mechanics in the game, because I think it's definitely much easier to show you how this works than to explain it, because it can be quite confusing, especially with a faction like the AdMech, who can have lots of different abilities that can conflict with each other. So to kind of show you what you have to do. So give me a second here and I'll load one of my game files. Alright, and here's one of my game files. As you can tell, it's turn 100. Now if you're playing on the impossible difficulty, you will not have the map under this much control by turn 100. I have the difficulty turned way down just to help me rush the technology here. And as you can see, if you've been watching my other How to Play series, this is much further into the turns with the AdMech than I would be with my other factions on a similar difficult setting, and that's just because they're so hard to get up and running early on. But what I would recommend for the research here, and if you're unfamiliar with how it works in this game, you have 10 tiers of research, 1 through 10, and you have various research options. And then to go from one tier to the next, you need to have 2 things upgraded so if you want to go to tier 2, you'd have to have 2 things upgraded in tier 1 to get to tier 2. And then likewise, to get to tier 3, you need to have 2 technology in tier 2 to get to tier 3. And at any time, you can go back and get additional research from your units on earlier tiers. It's not like you just can select 2 and that's the only ones you can get. You can potentially unlock everything throughout the course of a game. So what I would recommend here, what I'm going to do is give you recommendations on what I'd recommend for rushing for your technology if you're doing the impossible difficulty. Because that's going to be the most important thing for you to help you get your successful campaign going. Because if you're just randomly jumping around on here, you're going to have a really bad time. So the first thing I got to say is, depending on what kind of start you have here is going to affect what I recommend. So if you have a spot that has a lot of food, then you're going to definitely want to be rushing infantry, and which that's likely going to be is your Skitarii Vanguards, because these guys have a ton of damage, but then they're extremely squishy, and then if any of the neutrals stay next to them, then they're going to do additional damage because they're radioactive. Alternatively, if you're surrounded by a bunch of units that have a bunch of Overwatch, you may want to get the Skitarii Rangers. But with how I'm going to tell you to build out an army, I usually skip the Rangers because I don't want to waste the time unlocking that technology. But if you're used to playing the Astra Militarum or the Craftworld Aldari, which has the Rangers or the Snipers, then if you like that kind of early start, because it can be very powerful, the Skitarii Rangers will be very, very similar to that, which will let them move through cover and do high damage output early on. But again, I would say only if you're real familiar with how to do sniper play would I recommend that you do that. For most newer players, you're not going to be familiar with that play style, so I'd recommend just skipping it. So in terms of the research, what I'd recommend getting on your tier 1 is you're going to want to get your Manufactorum Cybernetica, so you have your vehicle upgrade. And then you're also going to want to have your thermo exchange efficiency, because that's going to give you bonus output to your power surge, and that's going to be an ability that you're going to have ready to use at the very beginning of the game at the cost of 10 influence, and we'll talk more about that later. But that's what I would recommend focusing on here. And then you get to tier 2, and if you are in a situation where you are able to get lots of food production going, and you're getting a bunch of those Skitarii Vanguards out, then you're going to want to get the Omni Specs here, because that's going to allow you to ignore range damage reduction, which makes it really easy to kill the gene stealers, the guys with the guns that are always putting themselves on damage reduction, or the bees if you have a bunch of those around you. This effectively allows you to nullify a lot of those reduced damage buffs, so you can really push aggressively. And then I also like to get the Xanarite Acceptance, because that'll help you get additional research from the Ruins of Vol, assuming you have those around you. You're generally going to have at least a couple, so I recommend going there. And then I usually get stuck on this, and I have to get the Hab Fane as well, so you can start getting additional population for your cities to be able to expand. But early on, it seems like the cities have a very low growth rate, or very slow growth rate, so I tend to get that next. But those are the technology I recommend rushing there. And then if you are in a situation where you have very poor food and you can't get infantry, then you're probably going to want to get either one of these Dune Runners or just get the Castle and Robots unlocked if you're really having trouble pushing out against the neutrals, but hopefully that won't be the situation. And then getting to tier 3 here, I recommend getting the adjacency integration, which will increase the building research output for buildings in an adjacent tile, so I find that to be very helpful. And then I also recommend rushing the Proto-Servitor Cradle, because that is a building that will increase the loyalty to your city, because you're definitely going to need that while you're producing your units here. Then you get to tier 4, and I recommend that you end up getting this Artisan Constructorium, because that is the building that will allow you to increase the production speed of your buildings. And unfortunately with the AdMech, they do not get access to technology that allows them to increase the production speed of this building, or the production, I guess I should say. So for most cities, you're going to need at least 2 of these to consistently drop your production speeds down to 1 turn. So you're definitely going to want to get that going. And then by now you're probably going to be running into issues with your food, so you're probably going to want to get the Solens acquisition teams, which will increase the food output of your food buildings. And then you're also likely going to want to get the Lucian specialization, and by now unfortunately you're also going to likely be running out of tile space for your cities. So as soon as that happens, you're going to want to get this ability here to increase your tile acquisition of your radius of your cities by 1. So how that works is normally at tier 1 you can only get 1 square away radius for your cities, and then once all those buildings are full, then you get it and you can go down to tier 2 and then tier 3 as you're continuing to research through your technology here. Then you get to tier 5. I recommend that you get the Stygian Enlightenment. That way you can immediately start reducing your research costs, because by now you're probably pulling your hair out at how slow your research production is going. And then focus on getting the Triplex Necessity, because by now you're likely also going to be making ore buildings, and you're going to want to increase the ore output by the more ore you have together with your other units here, so that'll definitely help you. Now you get to tier 6, and what I recommend getting is the Voss Prime, which will allow you to increase the influence production of your units. Assuming you're making some influence generating buildings, you'll want to rush that as well. And then I typically will get the Hammer of Wrath. That way I can have that ability unlocked once I start making units like the Knight Crusader, who will be a backbone of one of my armies to really help me push effectively here. Now we get to tier 7, and now is finally when you start to be making some really good units. So you're going to want to get the Cataphragm Destroyers. These are like your ultimate infantry units for the AdMech, but they're very food intensive. So if you're in a spot where you just have no food and you can't get a food requiring army going, then you may want to skip this for now. But hopefully by this point in the game you have a situation where you're able to get enough food generation where you can start making some of these, because this will be a huge power spike to let you start killing other factions, because this will allow you to do significant damage to pretty much all the units throughout the rest of the game. They're just very squishy, so it can be hard to keep them alive if you don't have a powerful front line to aggro the attacks. But definitely I like to rush that. And then I also get the Reclamator Protocols, which increases the growth rate of the cities, because by now you're likely going to be running into difficulties where you're building more buildings than you're having population for, unless you've been doing really good about getting excessive populations with your shelters. But for my playthrough, even on the excuse me, even on the easier difficulty, I was finding that my cities were having trouble keeping up with their population, so I definitely recommend getting that. And then finally you get up here to tier 8. What I recommend getting is the solar reflectors, because by now you're definitely going to be having issues with your energy production, and this will help supplement that by giving you additional energy output for every energy production building that you have that's next to each other. And then you're likely going to want to get the Scriptorium Ordinatus here to increase the armor penetration of your heavy weapons, to keep pushing through. And then finally we get to tier 9, and this is where we get our ultimate unit, the Knight Crusader. So you'll definitely want to get these guys going. Now if you, for whatever reason, you don't have a lot of ore, you may want to skip this right now and instead get the Optate Restrictions, which will increase your population of your city so you can make less living buildings for your Hab Fanes are what they're called for the AdMech here. And then you're also, if you're at risk of running out of tiles for your cities, you're going to want to get the Hive World approval. So it's going to kind of depend on what your situation is. Lots of ore, get your Knight Crusader in this. If you're not having enough ore, then you're likely going to get these two instead. And then finally you get to tier 10. And again, this is going to depend on your current situation. As you know, I always recommend that you rush these loyalty building outputs, because you know, the more loyalty you have, the more production speed you have, the more resource output your cities have, and all that can help increase your economy. I also really like to get the Blessed Conduits. That way it'll reduce the cooldown on my power surge, so I can get that pumped out as fast as possible, so I can get that resource buff. And then you may also want to get the terrain generalism, but this is not something you typically want to rush right away unless you're building lots of new cities, where you want to have that increased production output to help build your new buildings, or you're building new cities to get additional armies going. So while this is a nice technology, it's not something I tend to rush. And then once you have several knights, you're going to want to get the twin-linked Icarus autocannon, because that dramatically increases the amount of damage that your Knight Crusaders are going to be doing. And so and then, as you know, I recommend that you come back and you start picking up other technologies that can be beneficial. But it's hard for me to know what to recommend, because it's really going to depend on what kind of army you want to make, and that's going to be dependent on the kind of cities that you have. So you'll want to pick up different kind of imperatives and buffs that will help benefit the armies that you're making. By now you should start to have a bunch of destroyers, so you're going to want to have the Skitarii Marshals unlocked. You'll definitely want to have your Tech Priest unlocked by now as well, and pump these guys out once you have the resources to support them, and I'll explain why once we start talking about the heroes. And then obviously getting your subclaisters out, because that'll allow you to make your Tech Priests your heroes as well, and help you get those data smiths to make new cities. So once you're ready to get new cities, obviously you come back here and unlock that technology. And then you'd also want to get your Tech Priest Dominus unlocked as well. And again, we'll talk about that more. If you are needing to have, if for whatever reason you have a lot of food, but you're really short on ore and you need a frontline tank, these Electro Priests are really nice because they have massive damage reductions. If you have lots of ore and you can get vehicles, I recommend you just skip those guys. And then again, obviously some of these imperatives you're going to want to pick up, but it's going to depend on the kind of army that you're going to be building. So I'll show you what each one of these imperatives does on the next screen here, and we'll talk about it. And then obviously you just select whatever imperatives are going to complement your forces here. And then obviously you'd want to get the Dogma Metallica to increase the armor penetration of your units. And go back and get the protocols here to increase the armor of your infantry, which will include your heroes to help increase their survivability. And you probably be skipping most of these things. If you're really struggling fighting aircraft, then you can get the Doom Crawler, which is your walker unit that excels at taking down aerial units. But honestly, as long as you have a lot of resources, both your Destroyer and your Knight Crusader are going to be way better at killing air than your Doom Crawler is, so I tend to skip these guys altogether. But if early on there's a bunch of flyers attacking you for some reason and you don't have your elite tier units, definitely getting these Doom Crawlers can be helpful. And then if you are going to get that, you want to get the Heavy Stubber, which will give them additional attacks. And then get the Savagery to increase the melee weapon damage, because some of your heroes will have melee weapons, and then the rest of the stuff. And then moving on to tier 7, you know, increasing the armor of your vehicles, because by now you should be getting vehicles. You'll likely want to get a couple of aircraft going to help you with your army production, so you'll want to get that going. And if you are going to be getting aircraft unlocked, then you'll be getting the Stratoraptor, which is your attack unit for the aircraft. And then going back, if you haven't picked this up, obviously increasing your armor penetration of your heavy weapons. And then if you're going to end up getting the Stratoraptor, you'd get the command uplink, which will make it so all the units around the aircraft will suffer less morale losses. And then obviously picking up the acquisition tile radius, and then I think we talked about everything in tier 10 already as well. So now we get into the very controversial situation with the Glory to the Machine Gun, where all your Canticles are. And again, so you have the Power Surge ability. You'll want to be spamming this throughout the whole game. And effectively what it does is it increases the output of a non-headquarters building on a target tile. So this is your headquarters here, so you wouldn't want to use it on this tile. But let's say you need food. You can see I have 4 food buildings here, so you'd want to plop it down here. If you need power, you'd put it on a tile that has additional electricity. You know, it all depends on what you need. What I think works most effective, because your research rate is so slow with the AdMech, is, especially if you get a start where you're near one of these ruins of Vol, is just take a square that gives you a research boon or a buff, and just put a bunch of research and fill it up with research, and then just use your power surge on the research tile here, and that will increase your research by 25%. And that can be a huge buff for your research to get it going even faster. And then obviously if you're really struggling with food or other resources, or you can put it on those tiles when you really need it. But for the most part, early game, I just rush it onto my research tiles to really help me blow through the research a lot faster. Now, as you get later into the game, you can start benefiting your research with some of your heroes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But before you can get them to level 6, that's the easiest way to start getting your research going to help you get your elite tier units. So how these Canticles work is they effectively get applied to your infantry units and your heroes. Most vehicles do not have access to the Canticles, so what you do is you're just looking for let's see here, the Canticles of the Omnissiah. So you're just looking for units that have these kind of abilities here. So let's say we're going to do the different litanies here. So the litany of the Electromancer, effectively what it does is it damages an enemy unit, and the attack scales with the amount of units that get the Canticles of the Omnissiah applied to them. So, you know, let's say I had 10 of these guys here. That usually allows you to get the maximum of your benefits. And a lot of these abilities, you'll say it'll increase the benefit that they have, the more Canticle units you have. So again, you just look for that ability here. So this would allow you to do damage to different opponent units, but it doesn't have great armor penetration, so you know it generally helps you kill some infantry a little bit quicker. But at 20 influence cost early on, that can be a bit expensive. But if once you get to late game, if you just want to have an extra attack, that can be useful for you. Now, if you are going to be making a melee army, then using something like the Chant of the Remorseless Fist can be helpful, because it'll increase the melee accuracy of your units by 50%, and it only lasts for 1 turn. If you're going to be doing a ranged army, which I strongly recommend, then getting the Benediction of the Omniscience is greatly helpful, because now all of a sudden it's going to be increasing the accuracy of your Cataphract destroyers here by 50% minimum. So let's click that, and now you can see it's activated for 1 turn, but it has a 3-turn cooldown. And now you can start to see things are getting applied to it here with their different benefits that you have access to, so that's real nice. And then they also get access to the Shroud Psalm, which is their passive ability. And then if you upgrade this further through your research tech, it'll give you additional damage reduction, so that can be real nice. If you're going to be doing melee armies, then getting the Invocation of the Machine Might will help, because that'll increase your melee damage by 50%. You have the Iron Soul, which reduces your morale loss by 50%. And now you start to get into some of the ones that are situational. So if you have a bunch of infantry that are just stuck in a massive battle, then you may want to use the Bulwark Imperative, which will give you +2 armor, but reduce your movement by 1. So obviously if you're moving across the battle to get in there, you won't want to use this, because that movement penalty will way outweigh the benefit. But once you're into combat, especially if it's going to be a prolonged combat, using that could be helpful. Again, if you're doing mostly a melee or a ranged army, then you may want to use the Protector Imperative, which will allow you to get additional ranged accuracy of your units at the cost of melee accuracy. And then if you have mostly a melee force, then you may want to do the Conqueror Imperative, but that'll lower the accuracy of your ranged units, so you just got to kind of know which one you're doing depending on what build. And then you have kind of the opposite of your other ones. So once you're in combat, the Bulwark Imperative can be helpful. If you're nowhere near combat, then getting the Aggressor Imperative can be helpful to get you an additional movement. So it kind of all depends on your situation, which kind of imperatives you'll want to be using on your units here. So next we will talk about the heroes, and they are very interesting for the Scutari here. So your first one is your Scutari Marshal here, and this guy you're only gonna want to bring if you pretty much late game, once you start to have a lot of infantry. Now if you're doing a Scutari Vanguard rush build early on, you could maybe make an argument to get a Scutari Marshal out, because he will dramatically improve them. But for the most part, these guys, I only get a few of them, and I use them late game just to buff up my destroyers. But they have several different abilities here. The first one is the Control Edict. And what that does is it allows you to select any unit. Oh, I'm sorry. What it effectively does, I thought you had to select a unit, but it actually applies to everybody within 3 squares of yourself, and that will allow you to pop these edicts, but it'll nullify the effect of the negative penalty of the edict. So if you had a mixed ranged and melee force, you could pop both of these and increase your both your ranged accuracy and your melee accuracy and your movement and armor without having the negative traits. So that can be very beneficial if you're having a weak infantry army starting out. You also have access, and this does consume your action, but you do have several free actions as well. And this one allows you to increase the number of attacks of the Mechanicus infantry, and this will give you 75% attacks. So let's put that on the destroyers here. And then you also have access to the Servo Skull uplink, and that increases the damage of all allied infantry units within 3 tiles of the Scutari Marshal here. So again, that's really nice to have on your Cataphragm destroyers here, because just by having these guys nearby, they're getting a 17% damage increase, which is real nice. And then late in the game, so I should have shown the amount of damage. So it's doing 48.3 damage here to a city, which is an amazing amount of damage. And then you can buff it further, because his tier 6 ability is these enriched rounds, and this allows you to increase the amount of damage you're doing by 50%. So you stack both of those buffs onto here, and now effectively this is killing, it probably would kill even more than half of the health of the city here, and now it's down. So that's how you use these Scutari Marshals to do shit tons of damage late game with your units, and that's how you can justify producing them late game. Early on, it's hit or miss. It really depends on how wealthy you are, whether I like to get them at the start. Generally, I tend to feed the experience to my other heroes, but definitely late game, having a few of these around your Cataphragm destroyers allows them just to totally pop off to an incredible amount. And then remember, these guys also have access to the doctrines here, so they'll get some of these buffs. Now, in terms of the equipment, Because these guys are very, very squishy, I tend to get them both of the armors because I'm keeping them away from the front line for the most part. I give them the endurance implant to increase their movement, increase their health with the Zote hide. In case they start getting attacked and I need to pull them away, I give them Felshen's Wing, and then I'll either give them the Scroll of Magnus if I have issues generating enough research, or the influence generating one if I'm having issues with the influence. So it all depends on kind of the situation that I'm in. But that's how you use the Skitarii Marshal. Now the next unit is the Tech Priest Dominus. Now these guys effectively just give you a passive influence and research benefit once you get past level 6. So these guys are real nice to have out, a couple of them out, because once you have that, that's 12 additional resources times 2, so effectively 24. That's worth several buildings. So that's what makes these Tech Priest Dominus really powerful. So definitely by late game you'll want to be producing several of these guys just to have huge boons to your economy. They start to fall off a little bit once you get into the later game, because by then your research is going to be done, but definitely early on these guys will definitely help you. And now these guys are kind of interesting because these guys are meant to be fighters effectively. So they have multiple attacks. They have a melee attack here with a power axe, and then they have 3 additional ranged attacks. They start out with just a weak heal that it can be used effectively every turn, and it'll heal 6 hit points. So that makes these guys, I think, more useful than the Skitarii Marshals early on, because these guys can heal either infantry, vehicles, or fortifications. So, and they just start out with that as a basic ability. So that I like to use these guys more to help me push than the Marshal, because the Marshal, he's just absolutely abysmal in combat here, whereas the Dominus can at least fight when she's not needing to heal, so that can be very helpful. She also has an ability called the Scryer Skull, and effectively this reveals any sort of unit areas that I can't see, so you could use the, I guess I already used up my action abilities, but effectively it allows you to see additional tiles to help you see what you're about to go into with your infantry, so you don't put them into a big Overwatch situation. They also have a passive ability called Lord of the Machine Cult, and this effectively increases the accuracy of your vehicles by 3 for everything that's within 1 tile, so it becomes really nice to have these guys surrounded in the front line with your knights, where you're sitting there increasing their accuracy, because your knights have all ranged weapons here, so that's a huge boon to them to increase that accuracy, and that's just a passive buff. And then they also have an additional ability that needs to be leveled up called the Wrath of Mars, and effectively at max level that'll give you 75% increased damage with your Dominus here, and it does have a 3-turn cooldown, so on the turns you're not going to be healing with this guy or move into buff or explore, you can pop this down to increase your damage output and help her really get some significant damage output. So definitely can be an interesting unit, and I'm all about getting those peer resource buffed units, so that can be very nice. Now, the one that can actually be more beneficial, though, are the Tech Priests here. And now these are the ultimate healers in the game. I think these are probably the best healers out of any faction, and especially once they get leveled up. And then they also have the added benefit by potentially giving you massive buffs to your research rate. So these are, once you get them past turn 6, they become amazing. They're very good before that too, especially once you start to get vehicles out that are going to have more HP, because obviously these guys can only heal 6 HP per turn with their healing ability, whereas these guys, once they get up to their maximum tech adept healing, they can heal 24 HP per unit here, and they can do that every single turn. So effectively, if you had 2 of them, you're healing a unit by 48 health, so that's over 50% of the health of your Titan here at level 6, so that can be huge for you. And then at level 6 they get access to the Data Blessed Auto Sermon, and effectively what this does is it's a free action and it affects everybody within 3 tiles that can be that can get the Canticles, so it'll only affect, you know, your infantry and other Canticle units. So later in the game, you know, if you have a bunch of knights, this is not really going to help you. But if you, especially early on when you're pushing with your infantry or getting a massive Cataphragm Destroyer ability, you pop this down, and then you can see all these guys get access to the blessed data for the one turn here, and effectively any kill that they get will give you 8 research. Now it only lasts for one turn and has a 5-turn cooldown, but this is a real nice boon when you're sitting there getting ready to kill a bunch of units. You'll just feed the kills to your Cataphragms and get you a bunch of research to help you aggressively push. Now the other things that they do is they have the gravitic field, and this allows you to increase the armor pretty much 1 per level. So at max level it goes up by 3, and that, or sorry, it's not increasing the armor, it increases the armor penetration, so it helps your non-armor penetrating weapons do additional damage to armored units. So that can be very helpful early on when you're fighting with infantry that may not have the armor penetration to help you get the kills. And then they also have access to the electroshock, and effectively this allows you to stun an infantry or monstrous creature. And then I think the cooldown is dependent on the level here, so it'll take away their action points and their movement. So that can be very helpful if you're fighting a very powerful infantry or monstrous creature that may be damaging you. You can effectively be attacking it, stunning it until the rest of your units kill, are able to drop it, and that can help you get the kill and then not take the damage, so you can keep pushing. So definitely a great unit. Early on they also start out with Master of the Machines, giving them a 6 HP heal, but once you get the Tech Adept leveled up instead, then obviously you're going to focus on the Tech Adept heal over the Master of the Machines heal, because this one's vastly superior. And then in terms of the equipment, they're kitted very similar to the Dominus. Actually, I don't know if I went over the Dominus's equipment, did I? So I get them both the armor because I'm going to be fighting with the Dominus, and then she has mostly ranged weapons. I actually give them the Omniscope, and that increases her ranged accuracy by 1. I get her the Endurance Implant, which gives her 1 movement. I get her the Zoet Hide to give her plus 3 HP and then 100% healing rate. And then I give her Falchions Wing in case I need to run her away to keep her alive, or just bounce around to these resource nodes to get them picked up. And then the Tech Priest, again, the armor to increase survivability, the Zoet Hide to increase the HP and healing, increase movement, the Falchion, and then the Tantalizing Icon or the Scroll of Magnus, depending on if I need research or influence, is how I tend to kit those guys out. But definitely very powerful heroes here. I think these guys, like I said, are more helpful later in the game once you start having your heroes regularly leveled up, so they can start getting all the passive abilities and really helping your Cataphragm Destroyers take out cities and other super heavies. But I really like getting the Dominuses going just for the pure guaranteed research output and influence output, but I also like to get the Tech Priests out as well, because once you start to get a lot, especially if you have a lot of Canticle units, then getting the Data Blessed Auto Sermon is very helpful. If you're not getting to level 6 regularly, or you're not having a lot of Canticle units, you may make an argument just to hold off on these guys until later in the game when you start getting your more elite units out that you're going to need these massive healings, and then just level them up depending on the amount of turns that are out there, because the farther amount of turns the game goes, the higher level your units will start as they're being produced. Well, your heroes at least. Generally your units that you create will start out at level 0 unless you're giving yourself additional benefits by turning the difficulty down. Now, in terms of the units that I recommend getting, actually maybe I should do a Skitarii infantry here just for an example. So let me just end my turn real quick and generate one of them real quick. So again, it's gonna depend on what kind of base you have, is gonna be the determinant of what kind of army you're gonna want to be focusing on early on. So these are the guys you start out with. by default, these Scutari Vanguards, they have the Radium Carbines, which actually have significant amount of damage early on. And they also have Rad Poisoning, which means they'll do additional damage to infantry and monstrous creature, and that's what most of the neutral units are in the game. So this allows you to do massive amounts of damage. So if you have a lot of food, or even if you only have a little bit, you probably want to get at least 4 or 5 of these guys total, in addition, including the 2 you start out with, to let you do a real aggressive push, because these guys will get damaged regularly, and until you get a hero to help heal them back up, you're going to have to run them back to the base or your outpost to heal them up. But in addition to the damage that they get here, you know, they have that rad saturation, which allows them to do additional damage to units that are within 1 turn of it. Now, it won't hurt your other units. It's only the AI, and the AI doesn't always take this into consideration, that they're going to take this damage, and if it does kill them, you still get the experience because it's your abilities. And then again, if you are going to get several of these guys going, then getting the Omni specs out there to allow you to get past 50% of the range damage reduction allows you to keep massive damage outputs of these Scutari Vanguards while you're pushing. Like I said, if you're having difficulty keeping your units alive and you need a frontline unit, these Electro Priests can definitely help you. They benefit from the Canticles because they are the infantry, but the big thing is they get the Siphon Vigor. And what this does is when they're killing a unit, it'll give you a 50% invulnerable damage reduction, and the more units you kill, the more damage reduction you will get. And so if you feed these guys kill, they can make it almost impossible for the AI to kill these guys until they get higher tier units. And even then, if you've gotten lots of stacks on these guys, it can be very hard to kill these units, and you can keep healing them up. And then they do get access to the Hammer of Wrath, but they typically don't do great damage anyways, because they only have 3 armor penetration. But the nice thing is too, is when they attack, they have the concussive trait, so it'll reduce the accuracy of enemy infantry and monstrous creatures that you're attacking with these guys, therefore making them even more tanky. So keep that into consideration. They're not getting damage reduction because of the armor, they're getting it because of the feel no pain and the invulnerable damage reductions. So that's how you feed these guys to make them pretty tanky. So if you're really struggling, that is an option. Your ultimate infantry, though, are these Cataphragm Destroyers. They have the Heavy Grav Cannon, which has 7 armor penetration, and then the Phosphor Blaster, which allows you to get additional damage. The big thing to know about these guys, though, is they have the Rapid Fire. So if you have them at 1 range, they'll get double the amount of attacks. So you really want to keep them at range 1 to get the most damage potential out of your attacks here. And again, they have the concussive ability, so it reduces the accuracy of the infantry or monstrous creatures that they're hitting. And then they also have the Lumigen ability, which decreases the damage reduction of any unit that's hit with their weapons. So if you're like in a fight against an aircraft, you'd want to start with the Cataphragm Destroyers, get that Lumigen debuff applied, and then attack them with your other units here. Now, if you're going to use the attack craft, this is what the Stratoraptor looks like. It has pretty decent weapons. It has the Heavy Phosphor Blaster. Again, it has the Lumigen, which allows you to reduce the range damage reduction. It's got decent armor piercing. And then it also has the Quinn Cognus Lascan cannons, and then the Heavy Stubber. So pretty much they're effective against any kind of unit you want to be fighting. They just don't have tons of HP, so they can get themselves into trouble. They have they typically want to be at range 2 to have all of the attacks going, so just keep that into consideration if you want to use the aircraft. And then again, you want to get them the command uplink ability, so that'll reduce your morale losses of anything within 1 tile of these guys to help you. If you're having difficulty with aircraft and you don't have your more elite units, this is what your Doomcrawler looks like. Again, you can unlock the Heavy Stubber, which will give them additional attacks. And then they just have a lot of additional anti-aircraft weapons here that have the Skyfire ability, which effectively increases the accuracy. against flyers, skimmers, jet bikes, all that kind of good stuff. And then they have access to the broad spectrum data tethers if you do decide to use these guys, which will again reduce your morale losses, and you can increase their damage by 25%. So again, it's just up to you whether you want to use them. Late game, I never use these guys because they're just way better units, but that is an option. And some people are really big into these tanks. I myself am not a huge fan of them, but this is what the tank would look like if you wanted to use it with their weapons. I just go mass tank crusaders instead. Because it's out of the same building, and I'd much rather have Crusader Knights than these tanks, and it's not too far up the research path to get those guys going. And then again, the Cataphrat Destroyers are your ultimate vehicle infantry, because this is your infantry building. The only other thing I wanted to mention is your Skitarii Marshals are heroes that are made actually out of your infantry buildings here, whereas your other heroes are going to come out of the subcloister, in addition to your cybernetic datasmith or your electro priest. Those are all subcloister building units. The cybernetic datasmiths here, these are your builder units, so they can found your cities, they can clear wire weed out of the area or difficult terrain, they can heal Adeptus Mechanicus units for 6 HP, and then they also have access to reprogram Castellan robots if there's Castellan robots nearby at the cost of 20 influence. So that can be a very powerful ability early on while you're getting those guys going. So I just wanted to point that out for you as well. And then the Knight Crusader, which is your ultimate vehicle here. It is mostly a ranged unit, which is really nice because it makes it amazing at taking down aircraft and fighting from afar, whereas most other factions, super heavies, require some sort of melee, but they have access to the Gatling cannons here, the rapid fire battling cannon, the heavy stubber, the heavy flamer here, and the twin-linked Incarus autocannon here, and that's the bonus attack that you get with that tier 10 upgrade. This is considered a super massive monstrous unit, so it has the Aura of Fear, which reduces the morale of enemy units around it by 2. It gets access to the Hammer of Wrath, which will increase its damage by 25%, and then because it is a large super heavy, it gets access to the Stomp ability. So in addition to being able to attack at optimal range of 1 if you want to do all the attacks, which I strongly recommend, it'll also get you access to the Stomp, which is a free attack as long as it's attacking a non-super heavy, non-fortification. So you can't obviously stomp a city, you're not Godzilla, so but you can stomp on infantry, basic tanks, but no super heavies. So that can be a very powerful bonus attack to help you finish off units. And I think those are mostly what I have to say about the different infantry units that you have access to. So moving on to your cities here, again, you can see I have 4 building slots here. That's because of the passive ability. So normally this would be a 3 production locations, but because of my passive ability, it goes up to 4. The real nice thing that this does, though, is if you find these places that have 30%, you know, by having this, it's going to make more sense for me not to clear that obstacle off of here to get an additional building slot and just get that 30% modifier going to these ore production buildings here to help me. As you can see, I'm having difficulty keeping my population to what it needs to be, so this is actually really bad because I'm suffering lower production penalties and resource output, but I just don't have the growth to be able to keep up with my production rate here. Which is kind of frustrating with how quickly I've been expanding, and this is one of the few factions that I regularly run into this issue with. But these are the kind of units you'll have potentially up to 4 units you can make per turn, some sort of hero or healer out of your subcloister, vehicles out of your cybernetica, infantry out of your genitor, and then aircraft out of your I don't even know how to say that, Archaeoptera building here. So that's how you kind of do your cities here. And then again, just pump in that power surge into here. And then at maximum level, you can go out to 3 squares with your city to help you know how big of cities you can get. And then you do suffer the full loyalty penalties with building additional cities. So you get -6 loyalty for every additional city that you found outside of your initial. Like I said early on, you're going to want to be making several infantry to help buff your to creep. Effectively, you're going to need around 4 of them to have an effective pushing force. Like I said, I don't like starting with the Scutari Marshal, so I skip him, but I do end up getting the Tech Priest and Dominus going pretty early, at least one of each, just to help me push and then get some passive healing to my infantry. Otherwise, what you'll find is you're regularly having to run them back to base to heal, and that takes a long time and can really, really slow down your push. And then again, you want to try to get your guys leveled up as much as possible. That way they get additional HP and also can start to get your other abilities going to help you get additional abilities and get that research going. And then the more research evolves that you capture, you'll get double the amount of research benefit by having them captured once you get that tech unlocked. Because normally I think you get 2, but now it's up to 4. And then if you envelope the outpost into your city by giving it the barrier here, then you'll get that 20% increase here. This one is not in my city, so I don't have the 20% population growth, unfortunately, but I am getting the +2 food because it's just outside the city. This one I am getting the 20% food production bonus to my city because it's got the border taken in, and again, that's because it's within 3 tiles. So when you're founding additional cities, you want to count the squares to know what is going to be the optimal situation. So you can see here, I've got a city formed because I need more food. Over here, I needed energy, so that's going to be my energy city. So depending on the situation that you're in, that'll determine what you want to do. If I want to get more ore, then I'd take a city up here, and then I would likely found another city somewhere over here just to get better production so I don't have to run my guys all the way across the map. But the big thing is just please focus on getting your research going, because if you're not getting at least 1 square fully full of your research, and then late game using your heroes to help increase your research rate, you're going to be so slow at making your way through the research tiles. And then be selective with what Canticles you want to get depending on your force selection, because there's no reason for you to waste all the research to get all these things going, especially if you don't have the influence to use them regularly. And you don't want to be affecting your units negatively with the traits. But do remember that once you start activating the Canticles, that you will get the buffs from the Canticles going on your units to help get them going here. So you can see again, these guys are benefiting from the Canticles and getting those things going as well to try to help get all this stuff going. So these ones have the Chant of the Remorseless and things going. So different units get different canticle effects. So that is how you would use those things here. And with that, I think that's everything I have to say about the Admech here. Definitely a difficult faction to play, but by late game they become incredibly powerful, and they have the highest staying power out of every faction because of the sheer amount and damage just out of the sheer amount of buffs that they get passively with their heroes and then actively through Canticles and other abilities, in addition to having the most powerful healers by having access to the Tech Priest to be able to heal 24 HP to any unit that you have in your army effectively every turn, and then can also stun and do all sorts of other things. So very slow to start, but by late game they become completely overpowered. Like I said, the biggest thing is if you're not researching quickly, you're gonna stall out and you're gonna get yourself killed, because most of the guys at the start are very weak and there's no way you're gonna survive an AI impossible opponent if you haven't been able to get your economy going and get at least a couple bases started to help you in your economy, because you're going to have very slow growth and very expensive buildings, because you're going to need to stack up your buildings, and you can't just randomly put them onto different squares like you would normally. And again, you'd want to have, you know, multiple energy things next to each other, have multiple population centers next to each other, multiple ore buildings next to each other, because then they'll just kind of all synergize with themselves. And then unfortunately they're very, very expensive, especially their high tier. So you're going to need food for your infantry here, you're going to need energy for your aircraft, you're going to need ore for your vehicles, and then depending on the type of units you're building at your subcluster, either food for your data smiths, food and influence for your tech priests, food and influence for your dominus, and then just food for the electro priest. So again, this is a food heavy faction or heavy faction once you start getting vehicles, and then influence to spam your abilities, and also help you get your heroes out to really get things to pop off for you. So I hope that helps you play with the AdMech. If you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe. It encourages me to post more content for you. And if you're an AdMech main player out there and there's different things about the faction that I didn't discuss that you think are as important to mention, or if you disagree with some of my recommendations, comment below, because I'm sure people would like to hear additional opinions. And like I said originally, these recommendations are for playing against the AI on the solo campaigns. Not all of these things would carry over to multiplayer, because you'd be fighting another human opponent that's not going to have overwhelming advantages over you. Because what happens on the impossible difficulty is the AI effectively, every city they found has 100% loyalty. Which means they're going to have 50% additional research production and production of their cities. Therefore, they don't have to worry. They're not limited by the amount of the cities they can form by the loyalty. And they also are going to way outproduce you, because they're going to have way more resource generation and also way higher production than you're going to have. And that's where the main difficulty is, and why you need to rush, and why the impossible difficulty is so difficult to play against with this game. Whereas against a human player, they're going to have the same kind of penalties applied to them that you will, and therefore it's much, much easier to play against them and counter it, and have a more dynamic play style using all sorts of different units as you're going through your research tree. And then you really got to min-max who does the most amount of damage and who's most cost effective early on, and do some other strategies. But as I don't play a lot of the multiplayer, because a lot of people tend to quit pretty early on playing, I have a few matches uploaded, but for the most part I didn't enjoy it very much, because the only way I can do it is by playing it with the same turns going on at the same time, and most people don't like to do that, because otherwise I find the games just take way too long. And then, like I said, once one player sends to be losing, or you're doing a team battle and somebody gets angry and rage quits, then you spent all this time, and right when the game's getting kind of interesting, they end up quitting. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the day. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.